Hey everyone, so today in continuing our look at the cognitive level of analysis, we're going to be talking about the role that emotion plays with cognition and vice versa. So over time, psychological and even neuroscientific research has revealed that emotion and cognition are quite intertwined. Emotions are believed to perform an adaptive function. So they help us to adapt to the world around us because they help shape the experiences of events. You probably remember something as being sad or happy, but they also guide the individual in how to react to events, objects, situations with reference to personal relevance and well-being. And then the memories of emotional events sometimes have a persistence and a vividness that other memories seem to lack. And these are called flashbulb memories, as I've talked about in other talks. So emotion and cognition, as I said, are very closely interrelated, and it's a bidirectional relationship. This works both ways. So cognition influences emotion, and then emotion also influences cognition. And the ways in which cognition influence emotion are through cognitive appraisals. And so we are evaluating and judging through our mind stimuli in the environment, things we see in the environment, which mediates through a person's emotional reaction. Sad things make us sad. Those same things might not make all people sad, though. Like, for instance, you could be with someone who's quite emotional over a romantic movie, but you may not have a tear in your eye. And so those are some individual differences between people on those levels. And then there are a few methods of study. The first one are traditionally lab-based experiments. There's also brain scans which have revealed the impact of emotion on cognition and vice versa. And then also studies of the amygdala, the part of our brain that deals with fear and emotions. So in terms of the amygdala, again, a part of the brain, this has a role in emotion and fear. And it also assesses and helps us to assess emotional events. It also assesses the impact of emotion on perception and decision making. And due to this, the amygdala has an impact on how we first perceive and then encode information. And the amygdala, like we talked about in the first unit, was evolved in order for us to help us survive. But it's taken on a long-term memory or a role in long-term memory as well in order to help us to appraise future events, to remember back to other emotional events. All right, so in talking about theories that involve the role of emotion and cognition, we're going to be talking about one of them here, and that's the cognitive appraisal theory. And just a little bit of background, a lot of early theories on the role of emotion and cognition often saw emotion as tied to a physiological experience. And all this really means is that a physical expression had to take place. Like, when you're sad or happy or angry even, you start crying. If, if you're angry, maybe your face gets red. They often thought those happened before we thought about the experience. And the appraisal theory from Lazarus in 1982 was the first to see emotion as arising from our individual interpretation and explanation of a particular event, even when we were not biologically or physiologically aware or aroused, which just means alert. And there were two factors in the cognitive aspects of whether we became alert or not. The first one was the nature of cognitive appraisals that underlie separate emotional responses. And so, if our schema for being happy or sad or whatever was alerted, then we're more likely to have this emotional response. And then the number two, or the physiological response, I should say. Number two was that determining or preceding conditions of those cognitive appraisals. If there's a bunch of things happening at once, the events immediately before that, or even events from our past, might lead us to different appraisals of the same event. And then there were two types of appraisals. The first one was primary, so the meaning and significance of an event to an individual. And then the second one was secondary, the assessment of an individual's abilities to cope with the consequences of that event. So the primary one is like, hey, what's going on? The secondary one, how well are we going to be able to cope with this? And is this a big deal? Is this a little deal? That sort of stuff. And the theory also stresses the importance of cognition. When we experience an event, thoughts often precede the physical expression of that event and the sensation of that emotion. Some cognitive processing must occur before an emotional response also occurs. So in terms of the theory itself and evaluating it, some have argued that although emotion and cognition are independent of each other, it's quite possible to experience emotion without cognition occurring. So if we heard a snake hissing, we don't need to cognitively process that in the minds of those who are arguing against this theory. The theory has also been superseded by neuroscience theories, which see emotion as being controlled by separate but interacting systems of the brain. So emotion and cognition working together at the same time. And then while all emotional processes have a cognitive component, not all cognition has an emotional component. In terms of perception, which we talked about with both schema theory and with top-down and bottom-up processing, perception can often be biased by schema so that individuals perceive what they wish and expect to perceive based on previous experiences, expectations, cultural factors, so on and so forth. And schemas can also often affect our perception through emotional factors. And these emotional factors create a bias. If something makes you particularly happy and you keep trying to do that, that is a bias in your mind which may not be for the best for you or for others. And then as far as memory and how emotion affects memory, it can be affected by schema, where individuals reconstruct memories according to which particular schemas they are using at the time of recall. If we're conjuring up happy memories, we're suddenly remembering different happy memories. If we're recalling sad memories, we're remembering different sad memories. But it can also be affected by emotional factors in other ways as well, like flashbulb memories, repression. If you have experienced some level of trauma so great that it's detrimental to your health to think of it, emotion can affect our memory in those ways as well. And then contextual emotional effects. And this is what I was referring to earlier. When we think of happy memories, we oftentimes think of other happy memories, sad memories, other sad memories. And this can lead us, especially when we're sad, to be in a cycle of thinking of these additional sad memories, which may not be always for the best for us over time. And then emotion also affects memory at all stages of the memory process. Because even for something like amnesia, there's physical and emotional causes to this level of amnesia. So in terms of encoding, this is the means by which information is represented in memory. There is a theory called cue utilization theory. And this argues that high levels of emotion focus attention mainly on the emotionally arousing elements of an environment. And so these are the ones that become encoded in our memory, and we sort of forget other details due to that event. And then emotional arousal may also increase the length of time attention is focused on emotionally arousing elements of an environment. This is especially if we feel like we're under attack or we really want to take something in because it's that impactful of a memory, those sorts of things. And it aids the encoding of those elements. The next one is storage. So this is the amount of information that can be retained in memory. And emotion can increase the consolidation of information in storage. It makes those memories longer lasting because there's more details tied to those, and they're much more strongly stored and encoded. But this is not an immediate effect, as arousal emotionally enhances memory after a delay in time. It also may take more time because emotional experiences incur more elaboration. And so it creates links again between the new information and previously stored information, which lengthen the amount of time. And then retrieval. This is the reconstruction of our memories. And this is also influenced by contextual emotional events, or effects, I should say. And it relates to the degree of emotional similarity between the circumstances of encoding and the circumstances of retrieval. And this can be due to either mood congruence effect, the abilities of individuals to match an emotion to a certain memory, or mood state dependent retrieval, in which there's an ability of individuals to retrieve information more easily when we are trying to retrieve this memory matches the mood you were in when you encoded the information. And these two effects occur because when information is encoded, an individual not only stores the sensory aspects of the information, like what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're eating, whatever, but also the emotion of that time. And flashbulb memories are a part of this. These are vivid memories of the circumstances in which one first learned of a surprising and emotionally arousing event. And for me or for most people, this often takes the form either of like national events. So, even almost 20 years later, I can still remember what I was doing when I learned about 9/11 and what that day was like, which I probably wouldn't have of a regular Tuesday when I was in 6th grade. And there's two mechanisms by which this takes place. The one is the mechanism of formation, and this is if an event is surprising and personally consequential, it will be emotionally rousing and trigger a photographic representation. And for this to occur, it is often said that it should be unexpected and again create a strong emotional reaction, especially if it is personally significant. So, I talked about national events being flashbulb memories, but also personal events can be very, very vivid. Like we can remember when we meet, our future spouse. We could remember when we made our best friend, or the first day of school, or our graduation day, or prom day. Or we could also remember bad things like the death of a relative, those sorts of things. And then also the other mechanism is the mechanism of maintenance. So after an event has been imprinted, it needs to be sustained. And so this can be done through two ways: overt rehearsal, conversations with other people in which the event is reconstructed over and over again, or covert rehearsal in which you replay the event in one's own memory. And oftentimes for ones that are highly emotional, we oftentimes go back to those memories over and over again, strengthening them even more. And a study that looked at the role of flashbulb memories was Brown and Kulik from 1977. And the aim of this was to investigate the determinants of flashbulb memories about assassinations, highly newsworthy events, and personally significant events. And so they took 40 white and 40 black Americans, which were aged 20 to 60, and they had them fill a questionnaire out about 10 events. 9 of the events involved political figures and assassinations, and the 10th event was an event that was personal, unexpected, and shocking for each individual person. And the participants were asked to write a free recall of the circumstances in which they first received news of each of those events. They rated each event on a 5-point scale for personal consequentiality and frequency of them telling the event to someone else. So documenting that rehearsal. So in terms of the results of this, black participants were much more likely to have elaborate memories of assassinations of U.S. civil rights leaders because it was deemed to be more personally consequential. Even for historically lesser known civil rights leaders, they had more elaborate memories of those figures being killed. And the occurrence of flashbulb memories correlated with the ratings of personal consequentiality. The more relevant something was to someone, and the more that someone talked about it, the much more likely that it was a vivid, detailed memory. And so the conclusion was that the results of the study really matched predictions of flashbulb memory theory. And it supported the role of personal consequentiality in the formation of these flashbulb memories. So for instance, I was talking about 9/11 earlier. I'm sure there's people all over the world who have a memory of it occurring, but to remember entire details from that day just wouldn't be as relevant to their lives. For us, this was a national event. This is a national attack. And so that is something that probably stands much more out in the minds of Americans than even in terms of allies like the Canadians or the British. It also supports the role of overt rehearsal in sustaining these memories, but it did not necessarily directly test the role of covert rehearsal. And it never assessed the accuracy of the memories either, which is a limitation of it. The next one is Yuille and Cutshall from 1986, which we will see in this class again as a study, but this is another one that's studying the role of flashbulb memories. And they took 13 eyewitnesses to a real crime, a gun store robbery in Vancouver, and the shooting was witnessed by 21 people, 13 of which took part in the study. And 4 months after the robbery, researchers asked interviewers, or they asked participants, I should say, to retell their story. But in this case, unlike Brown and Kulik, they determined the accuracy of the participants' memories by looking at the police reports. So the results, misleading questions had very little effect on recall. They were not able to change the reconstructed memories of the participants, and they were able to accurately recall a large number of details. And so there was 2 potential explanations. First was that reconstructive memory could only be tested through lab experiments. But most likely, the study actually tapped into a different memory phenomenon, flashbulb memory. And so the strong emotional experience led to stronger encoding as well. So in terms of evaluating flashbulb memories, the accuracy of flashbulb memories don't always hold up. It's similar to reconstructive memory. But a lot of other studies have shown that our memories are not always consistent in the recall of events over time. Even though we've shown that highly emotional events are usually remembered for longer periods of time. In terms of evaluating emotion and memory, there are a few criticisms, including that of mood state dependent memory. Some have said that this is the result of artificial labs. And then even in this study from UCross in 1987, the phenomenon worked better when the subjects were paid, which we've talked about before as an ethical possible bias in the study. It also focused on focusing on emotionally threatening aspects of an event makes evolutionary sense. If you hear something in the bush and you're making a probability choice that it's a lion or something like that, based on our evolutionary history living in, the bush, we are more likely to need to know that information and to remember that information. There's also ethical considerations, changing a subject's mood, especially if you're recalling sad events that may have an effect on them mentally. And you must also have informed consent, right to withdraw, and participants given a full debriefing afterwards to reduce the impact of any emotional stress. All right, with that being said, if you have any questions, please come find me. And as always, I hope you have a great day.